Welcome to the Chicagoland Guide, and I'm your host, Aaron Masliansky. Today, I am here with Erica Hornthal. Erica is the therapist who moves you, and we're going to talk about that. Erica is based in the North Shore in Highland Park, and there's a lot to get to, and I think what she's doing is so unique and so great, and we're going to get all to it. So, Erica, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Pleasure. So you are a licensed professional counselor, and you do stuff with dance and body movement. Tell us about that. How did you get to discover this path?
Actually, it's very Chicago heavy because I ended up going for my master's degree in dance movement therapy and counseling in the city of Chicago at Columbia College Chicago. They actually were one of the few programs in the country to have dance movement therapy. So it's been a pretty direct route. I grew up dancing, and when it came time to look for what I wanted to do with my life, I knew I wanted to help people. But I was actually able to find a way to marry helping people, psychologically speaking, behaviorally speaking, with my love for dance and movement. And just through my education, through my background and internship, inevitably that's actually exactly what led me to opening my own practice and then settling in the North Shore, which has been a really wonderful place for me, my clients, and the work that I do.
And a lot of people, when they think therapy, they think talk therapy, sitting on the couch, laying on the couch, and talking through it. I mean, does any of that happen with your therapy, or is it all through movement?
Yeah, so the way that I like to break it down for people is that movement is in everything that we do. So it's very challenging because we do get hung up on the word dance. And understandably so, there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of stereotypes and assumptions that we make around dance, myself included. Because had you asked me what dance movement therapy was 25 years ago, I probably would have had a very different answer than how I practice. But I think it's really important that people understand and remember that movement isn't everything. So sitting on a sofa could be all of the movement that we are capable of today in this moment. It could also be moving to a different part of the office. It could be laying down when we're feeling really overwhelmed. It could be allowing ourselves to walk or pace as we're retelling a story. And then for some of my clients, it actually is getting up and moving to music or creating their own music or dancing to express what words cannot uncover, because body language and nonverbal communication makes up so more of our overall expression than just our words do. So, to someone walking by my office, if you were able to peek in, which, confidentiality doesn't allow us, but if you were able to be
Sure.
a fly on that wall, you would mostly see my clients sitting across from me on a chair or a sofa. It's my lens that I bring in as a movement therapist that allows for a different therapeutic relationship. And it's just the openness and the willingness to allow people to move in a way that expresses what they're feeling in that moment. So if it's collapse and we just need to lay on the floor and just breathe, because
Yeah.
sometimes that's hard enough. Or again, sometimes we need to actually move, shake, dance, wiggle in ways that we feel almost like too suppressed to do in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah. And years ago, I had the Music Institute of Chicago on the
Mhm.
show, and I know they talk about all those they use those different types of methods that people don't necessarily think about, but it is a great option to be able to have different methods to
Mhm.
get through your anxiety. And I feel that for myself, even, sometimes you need to have talk therapy, but the movement or exercise like can break through some of the things that you are dealing with.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that you've done is, you've created a book called BodyTalk,
Mhm.
which has these different types of movements and patterns and things that you can do. And I think that it's so insightful. I mean, you've written multiple books. I mean, do you get a lot of people talking to you about this? I mean, what has the success been from this?
Yeah, it was interesting because Body Talk, which is the most recent book that I put out, kind of came from I put a card out a card deck before that, which kind of came as a result from the book that I published before that. So it's almost like what I've created has been from the feedback I received prior. So the feedback I was receiving right before I got the idea and started working on Body Talk was that people still needed the how. Okay,
Hmm.
how do I do this though? Show me how to do these things. And in dance movement therapy, it is so much less about us, the therapist, showing someone how to do something. It's not as prescriptive as people might think in terms of like an exercise or a somatic practice. It's much more about uncovering what you need, listening to your own inner guide, body, you know, sensations, reflexes, etc. And so the feedback after Body Talk has really been thank you. Thank you for
Hmm.
putting this out there because I knew that I needed to listen to my body. I knew that I was fighting my body. I was in my head too much, overthinking, but I still didn't understand what that meant in terms of movement. So it was really important for me to put out a resource that really allowed people to move from the beginning. I take people through this developmental aspect of movement, which I did not create. I got to learn from people that, um, created a model, kind of elaborated on models that were, written back in the 60s and 70s, even earlier than that. And it really just shows that how we experience life, how we end up thinking about things, all comes from our movement patterns. So allowing people to tap back into sensation, understand how to regulate or feel regulated in their body, stabilize, mobilize. This is what allows us to eventually trust, to build attachments, secure attachments, hopefully, allows
Hmm.
us to emote, express our emotions, communicate more effectively. So the feedback overall has been really positive because one, it was coming directly from my readers saying, "Hey, I need this resource." I created the resource and they were like, "Thank you. This is exactly what I needed," because I was doubting myself. I wasn't sure how I needed to move. And the guide that tells me daily what I should be working on or how I could move differently to think differently has been life changing. So, so far, so good. Knock on wood. The feedback's been wonderful.
That's fantastic. You know, though with stress, I mean, we all deal with it, but why are we so stressed? Like is this just something that anecdotally has been a human condition forever, or is this like the American condition of the 21st century?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. I have this question, I have this conversation pretty regularly, and I think I go back to, let's say millions of years ago, right? When we were moving to survive, right? We were moving to get away from a threat. We were moving to search for food. We were not so much in this high thinking cognitive brain that we have evolved into, which is not a bad thing. But I almost feel like we've out evolved our natural instincts to move. And when we're not moving, we are not allowing our body to move emotions through it. So we're sitting at our desks day in and day out for hours at a time. Now we have portable computers in our hands, in our pockets, where we're scrolling constantly. So not only has movement been limited, but the size of our movement is so much smaller.
Yeah.
And so while people could say, oh, we've got so many more responsibilities and there's so much more going on in the world, global warming, warfare, etc. Yeah, that is a reality, but also we have completely changed our relationship to movement. And so now we convince ourselves that we have to get it back in at the end of the day and go to the gym for a couple of hours. And if we're not motivated to do that, then, movement isn't for us. We just really need to be looking at ways to help emotions the anxiety in particular, move through us. Because if it doesn't, it will build up. And then, yeah, we will have this epidemic of over anxious, overworked, overproductive um, individuals that can't rest. We don't know how to relax anymore, unless
No,
it's like a remote beach. And then the minute we come back from the remote beach or retreat, we're overwhelmed again. So it's like you
it's
have
true.
to learn to be the rest and recuperation so that you bring that with you wherever you go. Because it's just where we've gotten so far from it. I think it is we're all capable of it. We just don't know how to do it anymore. We've
Yeah,
totally forgotten.
we don't know how to relax. I mean, that's why
Mm-mm.
people turn to, drugs and alcohol so much because it's just a way to kind of shut off. And it's like when you have a computer in your pocket that you need to be attentive to all the time, it
Yeah.
can it can make you extremely anxious. And then you have other things going on. I mean, right now we're recording this on November 3rd, 2025,
Uh-huh.
and there's a lot of ice activity going on, immigration throughout the North Shore. This past, yeah, I live in Evanston, Skokie, Evanston area,
Uh-huh.
and there were a lot of things happening on Friday, Halloween. It was crazy. My
Oh,
daughter's at
yeah.
school, and they're watching it from their windows in the lunchroom. I mean, that really can wreck you. And
Yeah.
being in Highland Park and what you dealt with on the 4th of July a few years ago, I mean, that's just stressful. So, you
Yeah.
know, it it shows up. It shows up in the community and then into your body, and it could show up that way, and it could become chronic and
Yeah.
stored physically. And so, how does that movement then get that out and deal with that in a way that is constructive and able to move forward?
Yeah. So I go back to this for me, kind of this basic premise that, and we forget about this a lot, that movement is actually what creates our cognition. And then cognition creates more movement, right? It's this cycle. But for a lot of us, we get to this point where cognition and thought and executive functioning is so dominant that movement becomes the afterthought, right? How do I move based off of how I feel, right? Not how am I moving, which created how I'm feeling right now.
Right.
So I think it's really important for us to remember that, right? Reclaim that movement isn't the afterthought, it's kind of the precedent, right? And so when we understand that or we think about that, it's a little easier to understand that how I'm moving contributes to how I feel. And if there's any part or time where I'm not feeling my best, I can't really understand how I feel, but I want to feel differently, then we always have the option to move differently. It's this mind body connection, right? It's not just our head, it's not just in our mind, it's our brain. And our brain's connections are wired through the way we move from the very first breath we take, from the movement that we do in utero, even, right? This kind of
Sure.
sensing, breathing, flowing, if you will. I think the last time a lot of us felt free were when we weren't conscious of our movement. We weren't conscious of our thoughts. We have so many thoughts that we're not conscious of. But the easiest, so to speak, way to change our thoughts is to simply change the way we move, which is not so simple for a lot of us. It sounds really hard, but change is constant, movement is change. So you can always have a little bit more power over how you feel simply by the way you move. Um, and it's biological. It's nothing that you actually have to buy into. Everything you are thinking came from something you felt at some point, some movement that you had. So many of us take for granted that we can sit on our own, we can walk, we can stand on our own 2 feet. Every movement we have has some type of psychological consequence, ramification, if you will. So clients that come to me and say, I have a hard time trusting, or I don't trust myself, I don't trust my partner, I have a hard time finding someone, I have trouble with attachment. I'm like, okay, let's go back to our developmental movement patterns. How did we learn to stand up? How did we learn to stand on our own 2 feet? How did we separate from the people around us? We can always rewire how we feel about those things simply by the way that we're moving. Um, so hopefully that helps people listening understand that there's a connection there, that how our thoughts are wired is directly related to how our bodies are wired. And so you don't really
Absolutely.
have to understand what's going on to engage in the process, right? Like sometimes we need to know the why. I love this example. I heard it from Gabor Mate, but I'm sure it originated elsewhere too. If a snake bites you, is you asking the snake why you did it and understanding where it came from going to make the bite any better? No, you need to treat the wound, right? The snake
Right.
probably will never tell you why other than it was feeling threatened. We don't have to understand the why of everything to start engaging in the how we can make our situation better.
So when somebody comes to meet with you, is it one-on-one? Is it group?
Kind of all of the above. So just recently I did a couple therapeutic movement groups at local nursing homes. I was in Evanston. I was also in Highland Park. Um, My private work with clients tends to be more one-on-one, but it's really any way that you would encounter psychotherapy, right? Talk therapy, group, family, couples, obviously individual. So it really depends on the need of the client, right? Or the concern that they're coming in with. And then it's dependent on the therapist. Some therapists are much more adept at group therapy. I personally love working with individuals. So that's my strong suit. Every now and then I will work, with a dyad or have family come in. But I think that speaks to the expertise and the comfort of each individual therapist, right? We kind of find our niche and go
Sure.
with that. But movement wise, you can do it all, right? You can have a group movement experience, you can have an individual movement experience. It is going to change your relationship to movement, right? Which inevitably changes your relationship to the people in the room because movement has this capacity to increase empathy, to help us understand where someone's coming from or quite literally move in their shoes. So, whatever your needs are, you can inevitably find a creative arts therapist or dance therapist specifically that's going to meet that need.
When somebody comes in, I imagine that it must be a little bit uncomfortable to start moving if it's a one-on-one and like doing these movements with somebody. How do you get them to overcome that?
It's not as hard as you'd think. I mean, I think that too, especially, for example, I will have clients come in and say, well, you were paneled with my insurance company. So they don't even know that I'm a dance movement therapist. They see my name, they don't see Chicago dance therapy.
Hmm.
So I kind of run that down with that. I'm like, are you familiar with dance therapy? Did you know that that's, the modality that I'm pretty heavy on? um no, but I'm interested, or I'm not really a mover, so I think we're just going to talk. That's fine. Whatever, I can meet you where you are.
Yeah.
um so I think it starts off with this cliche, right, of like meeting where the person where they are, and most of my clients are in their thoughts. We're in these overthinking, very high anxiety patterns. I see myself in that a lot too. And it's creating a bit of curiosity. Can you connect for a moment? How does the way you're thinking right now connect to the way you're moving? Right. So I can ask someone, like, how do you know you're anxious? Well, I think really fast. Okay. But if you couldn't think or talk, how would your body display your anxiety? So we start to look at it from this top down model, right? I'm thinking about how it looks. So I'm meeting them in that cognitive side. And then once we have this moment of my heart's racing, my shoulders are really tight, my belly's tense, I can't even feel my feet. It's the gateway, right? Where I'm like, okay, we have a body, right? We have this area outside of the mind. Would you like to do something with it? Would you
Right.
like to move it in a way that might help manage your anxiety? And the answer is usually yes, because maybe they've tried everything else, or they're trying to avoid trying other things, to kind of try every holistic approach possible. So there isn't too much resistance. There may be resistance to certain types of movement, which is okay. If I said, hey, well, let's get up and start dancing, I would feel uncomfortable myself because I'm
Yeah.
picking up on their discomfort too. So it's not it's not me expecting, or, the goal isn't to start, doing the cha-cha slide in my office. If you never get there, that's okay. That's not the goal. The goal is to express ourselves more fully. And so if that's learning to emote with my face more, if it's learning to use my hands more, if it's just learning to shift my posture when I start to feel really overwhelmed, I think that's really important. Those can be the goals. If I can offer an example, I was working with a physician and he was experiencing a lot of tension, a lot of anxiety in the workplace. He was having a lot of changes in his home life as well. So it was totally understandable why he was feeling this way. And I
Sure.
asked him, what's a movement that you do a lot of during the day? Because he sits, but then he goes to his clients or patients. And he said, well, I'm constantly washing my hands. Okay, that's good to know. I'm glad to hear that. So I said, what does it look like when you wash your hands? And so he, imagines, puts his hand under the faucet and he's like scrubbing really, really hard, frantically, right? Scrub, 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 scrub. So then I asked him, like, how do you think that scrubbing, that really hard intensity, fast pace perpetuates or stops your anxiety, right? And he was like, oh, it totally feeds into it. That is the rhythm of my anxiety. So one of
Oh,
the
yeah.
interventions we talked about was next time you wash your hands, it's the duration, not the intensity, right? Wash your hands for 20 seconds, but can you slow it down? Can you like massage the soap into your hands, get into the crevices of your fingers, and then slowly rinse your hands off? And he was like, yeah, I think I could. It was really hard for him to do because it was an ingrained habit. But that
Yeah.
intensity and that pacing is often the autopilot that is driving our anxiety, and we don't even realize it. So it was one intervention that really changed things for him. He was mindful of it. If he was feeling anxious, it slowed him down enough in the moment to then go to the next patient with fresh eyes.
Yeah, I think that movement sometimes when you're in, like, by changing that movement pattern, I notice it myself sometimes where it's like, okay, just breath, move differently, and you can move on better. I
Yeah.
mean, and you work with people of all ages?
Yeah, so far my youngest was 3. I don't particularly work with young kids anymore, but early in my career, my youngest client was 3, and I love to work with older adults. I don't do that as much anymore, but my oldest client was 107.
Wow.
Yeah, so it
What do
was
you
pretty
do with 100
big
I mean,
range.
how like, how is it different between, say, a 3-year-old and a 107-year-old? Like, what are you doing differently with each of them, or is it similar?
Yeah. So ironically, it's not all that different. I'll tell you like for a couple reasons. And not to say like, oh, 107-year-olds act like kids. No, that's not what I mean, right? I'm not trying to infantilize
No, no.
anybody, right? Some people would, but I think the point is that a 3-year-old doesn't have a lot of inhibition. And at 107, there's not a lot of inhibition there either, right? Whether or not you have a dementia or not, it's like you get to a certain age and you just want to do what you want to do, say what you want to say, um, you know, live your life because we don't know how much longer we have, right? I mean, I think at
Right.
107, it's fair to say that. Any of us could say that at any time, but certainly at 107. So the difference cognitively, oftentimes, and physically, is the lived experience, right? A 3-year-old typically is at the beginning of their life. 107 is typically at the end of their life. So the experience that the body has had, vastly different, but the patterns and the origins are kind of the same. And the older we get, we tend to revert back to some of those early movement patterns, especially for individuals with some form of dementia. Um, the connections in the brain start to dissolve, and we see younger movement patterns, which oftentimes can bring up younger thought patterns too.
Hmm.
So it wasn't all that different. The difference really for me is the mobility. The woman that I was working with, who was 107, did not have a lot of mobility. That's not true for all 107-year-olds, but we haven't met that many of them. She
No.
was chair-bound. There were days where she was bed-bound. For me, it's the capacity and it's the potential. Movement is what allows us to tap into our cognitive potential. So if there was any way that I could move with her, whether that was rhythmically, putting on a favorite song, holding her hand, walking with her, sitting with her in the lunchroom because she was living in a nursing home at the time. Those are all movement. Those are all ways that we move. And oftentimes there were days she wasn't getting that at all. So it was connecting with someone, moving in a different way, allowed her to have a conversation. We would start speaking. She might voice her concern about something. She could even set a boundary. We could move in a way that she would say, no, not today. Or,
Yeah.
yes, I'd like to do that. Um, so even though there is a huge age difference, it really isn't all that different when we look at movement. We're just looking at the movement present. And while a 3-year-old might have a lot of energy that maybe a 107-year-old doesn't have, um, the capacity, right, the potential to move isn't all that different. And we're just looking at what's possible in each moment. So
Right.
I have so much fun working with older adults, even though a lot of people would say, well, how much can you do? Right? They're not moving, like, but they are. They are moving. They're moving in their own way in whatever way they can in that moment.
Right. And then on the younger scale, when you look at children, I mean,
Mhm.
how and kids have a lot of energy, they could have anxiety, whatever it may be.
Sure.
How can parents encourage their kids through different movement patterns that can, if they're working with you, could kind of reinforce that and uh, help them through?
I think one of the big things is not placing your own judgments of movement on your child. So, as an example, and this happens in school, happens everywhere. If we see a child moving too much or being too animated, too emotional, too whatever, insert the word, we want to quiet them. Stop, sit, don't, not right now. And while I understand certain movements aren't acceptable in all situations, we're not necessarily looking to meet the child in what they need. We're just looking at kind of repressing what they're doing that doesn't match what we think is appropriate in the moment. So if you have a kid that's being pretty loud, excited, running around, and you're not in an environment to do that, are we adjacent to an environment that will allow that? Can we say, you know what? I think little Joey needs to run around for a moment. We'll be right back. And if we're having a dinner with family, can we go outside, jump up and down for a little bit, shake out our wiggles, and then come back to the table?
Right.
Looking at movement as an intervention, not a problem, not a problem to be solved. Not You can't solve a moving problem with stagnation. You can't solve a movement problem with immobility, right? And yeah, if it's a child in particular that's having an emotional outburst, less movement isn't going to help that either. So I recognize people listening might be like, but it's not always the time and place. I understand that, but I'm just opening up the possibility, right? Are we looking at
Right.
the potential? Oh, yeah. Like I tell my clients, if you're feeling really anxious, you're on a first date or you're in a meeting, can you excuse yourself to use the restroom? Who doesn't need to use the bathroom, right? Who's going to say, no, you can't go to the bathroom right now? We can do a few little regulating tools or exercises in the bathroom, splash our face with water, shake our hands, take some breaths. There's a lot of things that we can do to meet our body to ease whatever tension or discomfort we're feeling. Let's start teaching our kids to do that young, instead of
Yes.
shaming them for it. Is there a way that we can meet them in that? Maybe even do it with them. You might feel better.
Right. And I think that if you look at the old school way of doing it, it may be take them outside and give them, a spanking. And that's
Right,
how
right.
people would deal with these types of things. And that, I don't know, I don't agree with that line of parenting, but that
I
is
mean,
the way that people would
it's
think about it.
repressing it either way, right? Like now you're punishing the child for needing to move, right?
Right.
Versus, supporting it. And you can still educate that there's a time and a place, right? Is it appropriate to start running around the office during, your interview in your 20s? No, I get that, right?
You're not going to
So
get the
we're
job.
not right, right. We're not telling the child run around whenever you want. We're actually creating a safe opportunity and space for them to do it. As parents noticing, wow, Tommy needs something. This movement is my assessment, right? Like as a therapist,
Right.
I'm constantly looking at movement as assessment, observation, and intervention. So, can I, as a parent, look at my child's movement and think, what is this telling me? We know as parents what our kids, we don't know necessarily better than they do, but we know maybe better than someone else who isn't around them what our child, what their typical movement looks like. You can tell maybe when your child's upset or when they're anxious, when they're really excited or indifferent to something. So start to become more of an expert on your child's nonverbal communication so you know when there's been a shift. And then as
Hmm.
they get older, ideally they can identify it. They might even be able to tell you, I'm feeling really uncomfortable, or can we take a moment outside so I can take a breath? Like my daughter's done that, where she's like, I need to get some fresh air. Can you take a walk with me? Yeah, sure. Is it
Hmm.
possible every moment right away? No, but we build tolerance and then we can address it later on too.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's also an important cue to look at, uh, either for when you're looking at a peer or maybe your partner, and
Mhm.
seeing that you know sometimes in the marriage things can get heated, and people need to be able to take a cue from one another, say, okay, and maybe take a walk, go outside,
Mhm.
change the movement pattern, and that can start to shift the mindset.
Absolutely, yeah, because, especially partners, people we've been living with for a long time, our spouses, we know the buttons. We know all the buttons that we could push to get under that person's skin. I think the tool is to not push the button, right? It's like,
Right.
I know what I could say right now to make you angry or to win, quote, win this argument, right? But the harder thing is to actually put a pause on the conversation and say, like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to harm you anymore. I don't want to hurt myself anymore. Can we put a pause on the conversation, go take a walk around the block? Or maybe we need some space. I need to go to my corner, you go to your corner. And when we've calmed down, not just of mind, but of body, we can come back and have a more reasonable conversation. One of the interesting tools, I've done this a few times with couples, because again, I don't do a lot of work with couples, but is to have a nonverbal conversation. So play out a typical fight without any words and just do it through your movement. It's really eye-opening because we start to see, the other person's communication, but then we also start to recognize our own. We're like, oh, I'm really invading this person's space, or wow, I just got 5 times smaller. Wow, I really shrink when I'm in conflict with my spouse. I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Um, it's amazing because there's so much communication right there, but we focus on the words and winning the argument and getting the upper hand. So it's such a powerful tool. We can use it in all of our relationships, obviously, especially the one with ourselves.
Oh yeah, nonverbal is the key thing. That's where I feel like most of the communication comes from.
Yeah, it's like
Um,
80%. Yeah, it's so
it
much.
is. Even in my line of work with negotiations, it's picking up on those types of things, and you learn so much more than just by speaking. You pick up on the cues, and
Yeah, because
that's key.
movement is what it allows us to feel safe, right? So
Right.
safe is a really hard word to use, I find. So I use like secure and stable. Someone's going to be much more open to a negotiation if they feel secure and stable. How do we do that? Through our body. We can't always control our environment, but we can control some aspects of stability and security internally. So yeah, if you're trying to broker a deal and someone's looking really frantic and anxious and they're jittery, it's going to be a lot harder to come to an agreement, right?
Sure.
Versus helping a client feel more secure and stable, maybe asking, is there something I can get you? You know, taking a moment to ask, like, how are you feeling about this right now? Do you need to take a break? Like, that builds trust. And then that in turn becomes safety. And people feel safe and they want to return. They want to come back. Oh, hey, you got to go to this guy. He was fantastic, right? He's the guy you should always go to. So,
Right.
it sometimes to people it sounds manipulative. It's not meant to be a manipulation. It's actually our bodies wanting to create security and safety in our environment.
Yeah. It's listening. It's true
Yes,
listening.
active listening. Yes, embodied listening. We don't know how to do that anymore.
I
So,
know. Embodied listening. That is a great, great phrase to use.
yeah, like AI can't embody like it can hear us, right? But
Sure.
chat GPT can't listen with its body and empathize with what I'm feeling right now.
No, it could sure pretend it does.
Right.
It's pretty
If
good
I
at it.
tell it and I type something in, it will tell me,
Yeah.
what it thinks I need or resources available. But yeah, that embodied listening piece is such a challenge because we're not it's not being modeled.
Yeah. I wasn't thinking to ask you this, but as you mentioned AI, like what do you think of that? Like people using ChatGPT or some of these other AI apps to talk through their issues because um I mean, I feel like if you've used it, like many people have tried it now, and like you
Mhm.
can talk through your issues, or it's not the same as movement. But I mean, do you
Sure.
think it's beneficial? And it's like on one hand, you can go to social media and you can see all these things and either get positive or negative reinforcement, but then there's the AI where you can talk through your things just with
Mhm.
that software.
I think like most things, there's good and bad. There's pros and cons, I guess I should say.
Sure.
I think if we're trying to make mental health interventions more accessible to people, then this might be one of the only ways that someone gets help or reaches out when they're feeling a certain way, for a lot of different reasons, whether it's financial, whether they don't feel comfortable talking to someone about it and they're more comfortable talking to, their devices or an AI. I think what concerns me is that, again, we're leaning more into this cognitive, executive functioning, kind of higher developmental areas of the brain that, while they're helpful, they override our limbic system, they override our reptilian brain, like the parts of our brain that don't operate on logic and reasoning. So I feel, is going to be completely logic and reasoning based. I'm not sure how and I'm not a tech person, so someone listening might be like, no, no, no. Um, Maybe if you're with something that's reading your face while you're talking, it can infer empathy, right? Or it can write in, nonverbal communication. At this point, if I'm going to go to like Chat GPT and just type it, it's not seeing anything. So I worry that we're going to go further and further down this path of disembodied therapy, disembodied mental health, because we're prioritizing cognition and logic and reasoning. I I think we're gonna find that we're gonna be in the same place, maybe even worse, because while we're on the computer, we're moving even less. So now I'm just moving my fingers, and that's movement, but when I'm on my computer, my shoulders are tight. My breath is really only in the upper quadrant of my body. I'm very headspacey. I'm really like in my mind. I'm sitting oddly in my chair. My feet are starting to fall asleep. It's not healthy for us. So
Right.
I don't want to knock AI completely. And this is a totally different conversation, but um, now we're getting to the point where like therapists are starting to use AI and, for things other than just note taking. So I think we just have to really reevaluate, like, there's a human aspect to it. It's all about the relationship. Do you want a relationship with a computer? Do you want a relationship with a real person? And if you don't want a relationship with a real person, that might be one of the reasons you need to go to therapy.
You're right. Great way to put it for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and
No shade
one
to
of the
anybody out there, but just think about that.
yeah, no, it's a really good point. Yeah, one of the things I learned about with Steve Jobs from Apple was that he would have some of his best ideas in meetings when he would go for a walk with people, and
Mhm.
walk around the campus at Apple or whatever. And that does, I mean, I find that when I go and take a walk, like, or take a shower, some of those best ideas come out because
Yep.
like you're changing your senses. Like you're either with the shower because you're not on a device and you could just think and you're feeling the warmth.
Right.
Or if you're outside, you're seeing things, it's fresh air, it's sunlight, it's movement. So
Yeah.
I think that like you said, like it's important for all those things to happen. Like it's not just the cerebral, it's everything else connected.
Yeah. Because we think through movement, we think through experience, through experiential learning. Um, which is a big reason that like our learning, our education system is changing so much, because it's like now we're trying to get back to the social emotional piece because we kind of outsourced it for a while. Behaviors really increased in the classroom and now we're like, "Oh, we should really pay attention to that social emotional piece." Like
Yeah, it's kind
maybe
of
we should
important.
build in a little bit more play, maybe we should let kids be kids and worry about test scores later, So it's a challenge. There's no right or wrong, I guess, my intention and hope for at least Chicagoland is to just utilize all the tools that you have. Your body is such a huge resource. And if you're struggling in any way, you don't have to buy anything. You don't have to take anything. Like it's right there. It's like the greatest free resource that we have. Meanwhile, while we're struggling to pay for things and struggling to get, things covered by insurance, like have you exhausted your own resources? I don't think so. Most of us have not, and we don't even know that it's there. So yeah, it's I don't know. All the modern day challenges are definitely impacting mental health more and more. But I think for me, it's like simplifying, going back to like everything we have is kind of where psychology started. It was a very mind, body, spirit oriented thing. And I think people got afraid of it. It got a little too existential sometimes for people,
Sure.
and they needed to qualify it, and quantify it. And we're kind of heading back in that direction where we're like, wait a minute, there's more to it than just thinking. I think I have to feel my way in to think my way out. It's a paradigm shift for a lot of people, but it's really getting back to the origins of the whole science of psychology.
That makes sense to me. But
I mean,
so
how else do
somebody
you manage what's going on in the world? I don't know. There's no words for half of what's going on. So you just have to create. You have to create. You have to use your art, your music, your drama, your poetry, like you have to emote. There's too much going on in the world for us to talk about. There's just no words anymore.
right. That's a good point.
Mm.
If somebody is trying to figure out, okay, how do I get into body movement therapy? Like
Mhm.
where do they look? I mean, you mentioned something about insurance. I mean, so is it covered by insurance? How does that all work?
Yeah, so it depends where you're located. Um, because I reside in Illinois, as a dance movement therapist even, I'm bound by the guidelines, let's say the rules of psychotherapy. So to be licensed as a psychotherapist in this state, I needed to sit for my examination. That license allows me to panel with insurance companies. So I'm personally not paneling as a dance movement therapist. I'm paneling as a counselor, as an LCPC. Some other dance therapists may be LCSWs, which is a social worker. There may be psychiatrists, psychologists. So it's the licensure that actually allows you to bill insurance. Not everybody wants to use insurance or wants to take insurance. So you may even be able to do an out of network situation where maybe you're paying up front, but then your insurance company will reimburse you a little bit. Um, Specifically, if you're looking for a certain modality, let's say, keep in mind you don't have to have any experience. So I don't want people thinking, I love music, therefore music therapy will be my thing. None of my clients at this point come to me because they think of themselves as movers or dancers. It's actually quite the opposite. So I would almost say, like, think of the things that scare you, that you're hesitant toward or you resist. That might be a modality that you want to lean into. But you don't necessarily have to see a dance movement therapist. There are lots of therapists out there that are more somatically based now. It tends to go hand in hand with trauma. Not a bad thing, but again, not everybody identifies as having trauma or sees
Hmm.
themselves as having experienced a trauma. So you can start with a general search, body centered therapists in my area. Psychology Today has lots of somatic therapists. If you're more interested in creative arts therapies, I would start there. So, creative arts therapy and then your region, creative arts therapy and your city. Specifically, if you're looking for dance therapy, city, music therapy, city. It seems like there wouldn't be a lot, but I guarantee you there are. There are like 300. I don't know if they're all practicing right now, but there's something like 300 dance movement therapists in Chicago alone.
Wow.
Yeah. So again, it's not just the modality, it's the therapist. So while I would love for people to call me, I might not be the right fit for everybody. And that's the therapy side of it, right? It's about the relationship. So
Sure.
if you're interested or you're intrigued, pick out those keywords, body oriented, somatic, movement. And with the movement piece, especially, just recognize that movement therapist alone is not a trademarked entity. So, under that, you could get a physical therapist, you could get an occupational therapist, you might get a psychotherapist, you could get someone that is not a mental health practitioner or licensed individual at all. They use movement and therapy helps us feel better. So it's more of a descriptor. So just educate yourself, right? When you find someone or you think, hey, I'd like to work with this person, read through their bio, see if you can have like a call, a little like a 15-minute explorative call with them just to see where they're coming from and where you're coming from, because again, I can't say it enough, it's the relationship that really matters when it comes to the therapy.
And do you find also just like, is there empirical data that shows that movement therapy is more effective than just talk therapy?
um so the voice in my head is saying yes, like screaming it, like, yeah, but also I don't want to throw talk therapists under the bus. So so there is evidence. There is a lot of research. Actually, if you just take out therapy and you just think of dance, there's so much research coming out of Europe, the United States, Asia, Australia, talking about how dance is the most effective form of antidepressant. Not to say that medications don't help, but so many people are on medications and they're not doing what they think they're supposed to be doing. So, dance alone has been shown to be such a powerful treatment for depression and anxiety. So, couple that with doing it alongside with someone, working in a confidential, um, secure, stable environment, right? Where you get to focus on you and someone is there for you, talking about you, with you. It really changes so much for the client. So there's a lot of research specifically on dance movement therapy. It can be hard to find because usually it's in institutions, right? Universities, colleges. It's not always accessible to just everyday people who want to search for the research, but it is out there. And then there's just a lot of research in general on like the benefits of exercise, movement, and again, dance for the effects of anxiety and depression. So those things are absolutely research findable on the internet and
Sure.
just reputable sources, right? Like always make sure that it's not just a random, blog that you're finding it on, but there'll be sources at the end, and usually it's coming from like ResearchGate or I can't even PubMed, like some of these larger sites that bring together the research that's been produced over the last few decades.
Sure. And then if people want to get a hold of you, where should they go?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm located in Highland Park. I personally live in Deerfield, which is just a few miles away. You can find me through my website, which is ericahornthal.com. If you're interested in the work specifically, you can check out chicagodancetherapy.com. And I love to mostly use Instagram. You can find me on Facebook sometimes, but my handle is the therapist who moves you. So if you prefer to connect that way, we can find each other in lots of different ways.
And your book is available on your website?
Body Talk. So I've got Body Talk, I have a movement deck and Body Aware. They're all available wherever books are sold. So you can find them on my website. You can go to Amazon if you prefer. But Highland Park especially has some great independent booksellers. So anywhere you choose to buy your book, you can order the book there.
Fantastic. Well, Erica, this is great. I think that, for everyone who's listened to this episode, I think that you've got a lot of tools of how to be able to deal with your feelings, and I
Mm.
think that that's what's key for all of us. I think this is a great resource, and I certainly appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you for making the space for it on your platform. And yeah, I just appreciate your time and platform. Thank you.
You're welcome.